We'll do a review of Lekutei Sichas in Chelek Tezayin, the first Sicha of Parshas Boy. This is a Sicha that Rebbe is explaining halachas in the Rambam's Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, which is based on the pasuk in this week's Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodoshim. The Rebbe asks that it seems in the beginning in the Rambam that he's trying to explain, to reconcile the months that are that we celebrate each month, which is a cycle of the moon, and that to reconcile that with the cycle of the sun as the month of Pesach, as we learned in the Parsha, and the Yontav of Pesach need to be within the spring. Shomer es Chodesh HaAviv. So in the beginning of the Rambam seems to say, goes by the Tkufa of Shmuel. And then later on, the Rambam goes by the Tkufa of Rabada. Basically, it seems like in some halachas we go by the Tkufa of Shmuel, and in some halachas we go by the Tkufa of Ravada. What is the Tkufa? The Tkufa is the season. We're mainly talking about the Tkufas Nisan. We're talking about the spring. The disagreement between Ravada and Shmuel, according to Shmuel, a solar year, which means the cycle of the sun, is 365 days plus 6 hours. 365 plus 6. According to Rav Ada, it's 365 minus 6 hours. That's the length of a full cycle of the sun. And we'll see that the Rambam, when he tries to reconcile how the year of the sun and the moon that we have every 19 years, we put in 7 years that are Shana Mubaris, that are 13 months, and at the end of 19 years, we have just a little bit left over according to Shmuel, and according to Rav Ada, we have nothing left over. So the Rebbe is going to explain that part of the Kiddush HaChodesh is the way it's done above. What comes here is only a manifestation of above, and therefore it doesn't really conflict. And the Rebbe talks about the Aroya Chama b'Tkufasa that goes by the Tkufas of Shmuel, and that seems to be there's other halachas that go by Shmuel. How does that work? And the Rebbe reconciles this by saying that it goes back to the years of Toyu from when we start counting, as we'll see at great detail. It's a detailed Sicha in laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, and Medav Halton Kopda, and we'll do the best we can. So let's look inside. Base, boy, Parshas boy, Aleph. In Onfang Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, in the beginning of the laws of sanctifying the moon, of the month, sanctify the month. Zog the Rambam says that Chodshei HaShono Heim Chodshei HaLevona. The month of the years are the month of the moon cycle. We don't take as the Gregorian calendar, they take the cycle of the sun and they break it up into 12 pieces. You break up 365 days into 12 pieces, you get about 31 days per month. But that's not the way a month, Hebrew, a Torah month, is not 1/12 of a year, but rather a cycle of the moon is the month. A month is when the sun appears again and goes through its cycle till it disappears and appears again. Each one of those cycles is a month. That's what the Rambam says, Chodshei HaShono, Hem Chodshei HaLevona. Those are the month of the cycle of the moon. Because according to the way the Rambam brings from the Pasuk, it has to be a renewal, which means there has to be a cycle. There has to be something new every month. If it's a piece of 1/12 of 365 of the cycle of the year, then there's nothing new at that time. The pasuk says the Rambam Shenemar. The pasuk says Oilas Chodesh B'Chodsheh, that you bring the korban oila. That's a special korban that is brought on Rosh Chodesh. So the korban of every Chodesh. So the Rambam quotes the pasuk is B'Chodeshoi, is when it is renewed. What is renewed? Renewed is the moon. When there's a new moon, that's the Chodesh, not just a piece of 12 of something, but there's a physical renewal. That's the renewal of the moon. Oilas Chodesh B'Chodsheh. And v'nemar, and then another pasuk says, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. This renewal, this is the renewal of the month of Nisan. That renewal, that's the Chiddush. That when we see the month of Nisan is Rosh Chodeshim. That happens. That is the first of the month, and from there the months follow. From the first cycle is the month of Nisan, and then it goes on to the other months. So, but now the Rambam says we still can't just count. We're not going to say that we're going to count 12 months, 12 cycles of the moon, and that'll be a year. Because if we did that, you're not going 12 cycles of the moon, which is 29 and a half days, 12 times 29 and a half, you're going to be missing 11 days, which the cycle of the solar. And the Torah doesn't just want Pesach to be on the first month of the 12-month cycle. The Torah wants that the Pesach should also be in the spring, or when spring begins, during spring. So therefore, we have to reconcile. And that's why every few years we add an extra leap year, as this year. Tafshin Pei Beis is a leap year. It's 7 years during the 19-year cycle, we have leap years, and the rest of them are regular years. And together, so the Rambam says, we calculate years have to go, goes by the sun. In other words, we have to take into consideration the sun. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Shomer es chodesh aviv. Shomer es chodesh aviv means you must keep that the month should be in the spring. So how, if we're going to count 12 months, 29 and a half cycles, and we're not going to reconcile that, so then the year is long. We're slowly going to be losing out on the year, and then it's not going to be Pesach. The month of Aviv is not going to be, the month of Nisan is not going to be in the spring anymore. 12 times, and then next year it's going to go all over the place, because you're losing 11 days if you just do 12 times. If you did 13 times, you'd be ahead. So we have to sort of make it up. Okay. But let's just see first others. So Rambam basically says that we got to do something to reconcile, so that the cycles of the moon should still have the month of Nisan all the time next to the spring, to the Kufas Nisan, as we'll see. The Pirush therefore, what the meaning is like this. Chodesh Halavano, a month of the moon, which means a cycle of the moon, which is the month. The Hebrew month is a cycle of the moon. It consists of 29 and a half days. That is the time that the Levana cycles. It cycles every 29 and a half days, approximately. 29 and a half days, the moon is visible again. It disappears, the cycles 29 and a half days. But on the other hand, what is the cycle of the solar, of the sun, which gives us the seasons? That consists approximately from 365 consists approximately 365 and a quarter days. That's 6 hours. This is the view, as we'll see in a minute, of Shmuel. Thus is there's man, according to Rav Ada, it's 6 hours less. But this is first the Rambam talks according to Shmuel. Thus is there's man from Sivuv Shnosi from the Zoom. This is the yearly cycle of the sun. The sun cycles 365 days and 6 hours and a quarter day. The Rambam in the halacha sagt zwei Dinge. So the Rambam in this halacha tells us two halachas. Number one, he tells us the Chodshei Hashana darfen gerechnet werden Leuten sivuv halavona, that the month of the year need to be calculated according to the cycle of the moon. Das heißt, which means as a chodesh, that a month is nit at 12 from Shnas HaChama. A month isn't one part of 12 of a solar cycle year, as the majority of the nations calculate. They divide the cycle that the year cycles, the 365 approximate day that the goes of 12 chadoshim. They divide into 12 months. But the Rambam tells you no, that the month of a Yiddish month, the Torah month, is nor Chod Shalavon. That's the moon. That's the Osashnas Achamo is base. Alpha PK, number 2, the Bible says. Alpha PK still. The Baldas Pesach Muz Zayin Bisman Ha'oviv. Since Pesach needs to be in the spring. So, a season of the spring, meaning that the cycle, a quarter of the cycle is spring, a quarter of the cycle is summer, a quarter of the cycle is fall, and a quarter of the cycle is winter. So the Tkufas Hashona, the seasons of the year, Zainem Bashtim, they are determined durch Mahalach HaChama. The sun determines at a certain spot, when it comes to that spot, that becomes the season. Was Ashnas HaChamo is mit la'erech 11 tag lenger v'ashnas levona. But a year, of a solar year, is approximately 11 days longer than a cycle, 12 moon cycle year. So in other words, if you have the moon go around 12 times, cycles 12 times, each time 29 and a half days, you total that and you try to see how much did during those 12 cycles the sun cycles. So you say you're short 11 days. So the Rambam is telling you that you still need to count that the rechet the yorn leut malach hachamo. So you still are going to count the. You have to count also the years by the cycle of the sun. And therefore, is yeder that zwei drei yor every 2-3 years. Macht bezdin an iber. As the calculation is in the machzakot, the 19 years, the 7th. Sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 3 years. Macht iber kidei sheyia Pesach bisman ha'om. So, in order that Pesach should be during the time of the spring, Torah says Shamar is Chodesh Ha'aviv. You want Pesach, the month of Pesach. You want Nisan and the Pesach to be in Zman Ha'aviv. So therefore, as we'll see in a minute about Pesach, the month of Pesach, but that it should be during the season of Aviv. So you need to put in an extra month. So an extra month gives you another 30 days. So let's say if If it's 3 years, you'll be missing about 11 days. And then as the Rambam straightens out those extra days, and that's why sometimes we have every 2 or 3 years in which we make a leap year. So what happens after 19 years? The Rambam says, then you only have a little bit left over. And the Rambam is mamshich in the Vaitik Prokim. The Rambam continues in the later on chapters. As euch der chesm welche Minutzenheit. So also the calculation we use today. So this would be, Bezdin would actually decide what to make a leap year. By that, it wasn't like a set thing. We were talking before about the Machzer. This was just practically in order to keep Pesach in the Chodesh Aviv. So the Rambam says that also the calculation that we use today was Rabbi Hillel Hanosiot Mesadik. This was organized by the Prince Hillel the Prince. He organized the Luach, the calendar that we have today. And it's also been set up in such a way. As Yeder Machzer, that every cycle of 19 years, that you have 19 years in that cycle, it straightens out. And the Rebbe adds the word lerech, approximately straighten out the sun years, the moon years with the sun years. Basically, in a span of 19 years, when you calculate the 7 years that have 13 months, and you calculate the 12 years that have 12 months, and you add them all together, and then you add 19 years of the 365 and a quarter days that the sun goes, so you'll come out equal, approximately equal. They will be equal bis as lo yishoir, according to the Rambam in Minyan Yimei Achamo, b'chol shas rishona. So there will be nothing more left over more than the number of the Sundays in 19 years. One thing that will be, the sun will be ahead once 19 years there, 1 hour and 485 parts. So basically, every 19 years, the sun and the cycles of the sun that we calculate every month during those years, some leap years, some regular years, once we end 19 years, we're almost back to exactly the same spot. The sun and the moon are almost there. The only thing is the sun is only ahead with 1 hour and 485 kilometers. Okay, so now what happens after the second machzer? You have another extra, you have another 2 hours, and plus those halakim, plus 4 hours. Frekt them the Pirush asks on this Rambam, as achar shonim rabbis, after many years, then es wird sich zunächst kleiben a große Zoll from the Yisroelis, when you will come together, a large number of these extras, of these hours that we just said with these halakim, you get a bunch of them, but oiskumen tkufas Nisan. So then spring, the tkufa of Nisan, which is spring, nit the chodesh ha'aviv, spring will not be in the month of Aviv. The month of Aviv is the month of Nisan, because you kept on pushing a little bit up after every tkufa, after every 19 years, the sun went ahead. So after many years that you collected together, so it'll come out that the spring is not going to be in Nisan, but not in Nisan, not in Chodesh Iyar, it's going to be moved up. So we're going to have not in the right time, Shemras Chodesh Aviv. How is it going to take place? So in other words, when they didn't calculate by the calendar, so basically would make sure all the time that it's Basically, would make an Iber when it's necessary. But we have already a calculation of Hillel Hanosi. He has already all set it up. And this has to fit that the Chodesh Aviv should be in this, the month of this should be in the spring. We need Nisan to be in the spring. But if you're going to move it up every 19 years from this calculation, then you're going to be pushing spring in Iyar. So it turns out that Nisan is not going to be in Chodesh Aviv. Well, Antwerp, so what does the Pirush answer? He answers, so the righteous teacher means Mashiach will come and he will let us know. The Rebbe points out that actually, if you calculate all these extras for the 6,000 years that the world exists, it won't go beyond. So these extras will not take us into the month of Iyar. The spring, the Tkufas Nisan, which is spring, will still always be in the month of Nisan. The Hoyer, bis zum letzten Jahr, from Shit, Alfi, Shnin, the last year of the 6,000 that the world exists, the Tkufa Ausfallen nach Als B'Chodesh Nisan, the season will always still come in the month of Nisan. So it's never really going to move on to the next month during the 6,000 years. Okay. So, but the Rebbe's question is that let it be the month of Nisan is always going to stay in the spring, which means the end of the month of Nisan will be the spring. So part of the month of Nisan will be in the Tkufas Aviv, will be in the Chodesh, will be in the Aviv. So we can call it Chodesh Aviv. The month of Nisan is the month of the spring because part of it will always be in the spring. But the Rebbe says, according to the Rambam said before, not only does the month of Nisan need to be in the spring, but Pesach needs to be in the spring. And with this extra, according to the Cheshvan of Hillel, the extra hour and chalakim that we get after every Machzer, will put Nisan, I will put Pesach before spring starts. The spring will start because of those extra hours. So while the problem of the month of Nisan not being in this spring is not a problem because for the 6,000 years it's not going to move that far, so Nisan will always be in the spring. But for Pesach to be in the spring, that's a problem. But we need to understand this. The din from Shomer is Chodesh Aviv. This is the halacha that you have to keep the month of the spring is nit nor as Nisan darf sein is man hov. It doesn't just mean that the month of Nisan, part of Nisan needs to be during the spring. But as Pesach soll sein is man hov. This means that Pesach needs to be in the spring. With the Rambam Paskin now, as Rambam Paskin. So before we had the calculation of the Ches, what is the Rambam rule? As B'Shaz Bezdin not ois gerechen, as Kufas Nisan, that ois fallen. Bezdin calculated that the season of Nisan, the spring, that ois fallen will come B'Shisha Asar B'Nisan, the day after Pesach, which means that spring would start on the 16th of Nisan. The Bezdin would see before, during the winter. Fleckman ma'aber zayin dem yor, so make an extra ador. Kidei sheyeh Pesach b'zman ha'aviv, so Pesach should be in the spring. So the Rebbe says it's the movement, so it's not understood. This that the Pirush that they explained that it's not going to happen with the Shita Moshnin, but that's not going to help us with regards to Pesach. Mitzad der viel Moliker zusammen Nebensammlung von Sheidis HaMachzer, because of this many times that we're going to collect the many 19-year cycles. and we're going to have to collect those hours, an hour and 485 chalokim. This it's till now. Even during the time of the Rambam and before, is schon Tkufas Nisan viel mal ausgefallen. Tkufas Nisan came out many times at Soltek noch das Wabnis. Now I know why is we're saying many times, because we have to remember when there is a leap year, that leap year puts the Tkufas Nisan, those years, it goes back and forth within the 19-year cycles. It depends upon what year it is. After 19 years, there's always 1 hour left over. That's what we said before. But within the 19 years itself, when you have a leap year, so that means that the month of Nisan is going to come later. So within the time, it doesn't necessarily, that doesn't have to be not B'tkufas Nisan. So Pesach was sometimes, yeah, B'tkufas Nisan, sometimes not B'tkufas Nisan. During the 90-year cycle. This that we're talking about, that it's always more, that's at the end of the 19 years, once we have all this thing together. So that the Rebbe is asking that in the Zman of the Rambam Nochri, Shet Kufas Nisan feel mo many times. In other words, when we had the full, we didn't have an extra month. Well, it's not a Shana Mu'beres, but there was many times several days after the 15th of Nisan. So that means that Pesach was not in the spring. How does this fit with the halacha that you have to keep the month of spring, which really means, according to the Rambam, that Pesach has to be in the spring, and not just that the month of Nisan needs to be in the spring, but that Pesach needs to be in the spring, as Pesach that Pesach needs to be in the spring. How does that fit? So the Rebbe basically is asking, according to the calendar we have today, and we know that there's additional days that are added, it turns out that the Tkufas, that Pesach, many times was not in the spring. The Tkufas Nisan started several days after Tezvav Nisan, some years. So how are we doing Shamras Chodesh Aviv with this calendar that Rabbi Hillel Hanassi organized? However, the Rebbe brings down that maybe we can say that Einochenami, according to the calculations that we brought it down over here, which is the Tekufa, the season, and it's the year, the way it's calculated according to Shmuel. So over there you have extra days. But according to the Tekufa, the way it's calculated by the Va'ada, that the year has only 365 minus 6 hours, minus a quarter day, then there's actually nothing left over. So it turns out that after 19 years, they will be just exactly right. And according to that, it'll work. So why is the Rambam bringing down over here something that doesn't work? Let's see. We could have answered that mitzvahs the Rambam is weiter with the fact that the Rambam says later on, as der Iberbleib von Asho mitope hechalokim, this extra of 1 hour and 485 parts, noch yed machzer, that we have after every cycle, is not like the cheshbon. It's only according to the calculation. Was wird angerufen Tkufa Shmuel, which we call the season of Shmuel. As Shnas Achama, according to Shmuel, the year of the sun is Shin Samachei Yom Revi'ah Yom. It's 365 days and a quarter day, 365 plus 6 hours. But according to the calculation of Rav Ada, Ashnas Achamo is Shin Samachei Yom. That it's 365 days, but minus a quarter day, minus 6 hours is like timtza b'toyses b'machzor sheyuta shana klal. Then in a cycle of 90 years, you're not gonna find anything extra at all. If according to that calculation, that it's a year is 365 minus 6 hours, and we don't have anything extra after 19 days. It turns out that in all the years of the cycle, Pesach will always be in the Tkufas of Aviv. It'll be always in the spring, so we're not going to have a problem. So basically, according to this, the calculation that we're counting today fits with the din that it has to be Shomer Chodesh Aviv, that you have to have it in the spring. The Pesach has to be in the spring. But minamen on, because we accept need them cheshbon for Tkufa Shmuel, not this season. The way Shmuel says it, who counts the year 365 plus 6 hours? Not them cheshbon Tkufa Rabada. But take the calculation of the year is 365 minus 6 hours. And the Rambam, the Rishonim say, was cheshbon zehu emes yishim harishim. This is a more truer calculation than the first one. We are stating Kama Rishonim as it's brought down in many Rishonim. According to this cheshbon, Falto is Pesach alamol b'tkufas aviv. Pesach always comes in Tkufas aviv. So, and the Rambam, though, is trying to tell us in the halacha that we quoted in the beginning that there is a reconciling between the Shnas Achamo and this nice havonus noch bis lo yishar mi mes cham chol shas rishona chutz mishoachas var be'es rishona. So the Rambam is reconciling according to the opinion of Shmuel, but Shmuel, it's not reconcilable. Yes, according to Rav Abba, it's reconciled, but the Rambam says that according to Shmuel, it's approximate, but that approximation doesn't really reconcile it because Pesach is not going to be in Aviv. Yes, the month of Nisan is going to be, but not Pesach. So, but it move on. Der Tam for was mit darf mash sein Shnei Salvona mit Shnei Sachama. Why are we trying to straighten out and reconcile, get the years of the Levana with the years of the Chama? Is to leave Shomeres Chodesh Aviv, is because we want to make sure that Pesach is going to be in the spring. Since according to Tkufas Shmuel, is noch jeder machzer da nie bleiben. After every cycle, there's left over, and therefore the Pesach is going to be many times not in the Tkufas Nisa, not in the spring. So how does the Rambam says? So how come we trusted this calculation? It says, it says, okay, it'll be 1 hour. But the minion. So what does it mean? How could you rely on this counting? About the ishtabus is it doesn't fit fully. It doesn't fit the halacha that you have to keep the Pesach in the month of Aviv, as the pasuk says, Shomer Chodesh Aviv, and Pesach, according to the calculation of Shmuel, okay, let it be a little bit, an hour. But these machzers will cause that Pesach should not be during the month during the spring. And therefore, how could we align it? So the Rebbe brings out that Enochanami, that even though Pesach is not going to be in the Aviv, but to a certain extent, we're going to have the month in the right. So that is sufficient. Let's look inside. Yeshloimer Gimel. Yeshloimer Abir. So we can say the explanation. From Loshen HaRambam, the Rambam's line, Vashonim Sha'onu Mechashvim Hem Shnei Achamo, Shenemar Shomer Es Chodesh Aviv. He says years that we calculate are solar years, the cycle of the sun, because the pasuk says keep Chodesh Aviv. His movement is understood as a limud for Shomer Es Chodesh Aviv. Doesn't say anything about Pesach. He says Shomer Es Chodesh Aviv is not nor as Pesach. It's not only that Pesach needs to be during the spring, nor that the Rambam says the Rebbe quoted before that Pesach has to be in the spring. But it's also from this lashon is mashma that nor oich has allemol darf oiskommen Pesach ungefähr in selben Zman von Shnas HaChamo. That it should be, Pesach needs to be approximately in the same time as the cycle of the year. It should be in the same general cycle of the sun. That's when Pesach should be, not 1 year in the winter and 1 year in the summer. It needs to be in the springtime. That's when it needs to be. So there is, Pesach has to be Bizman Aviv, but also Pesach needs to be in the general time of the spring. Und in dem Din von Shomer es Chodesh Aviv b'shayches zu the Shomer. So the halacha that we need to keep the month, that it should be in the spring b'shayches to the Shomer, so that it should be in approximately the same time of the year, is genug sheyeh Chodesh zeh Nisan Bizman Aviv. So then for that, we don't need Pesach to be the Aviv. We need this month of Nisan should be Zman Aviv. As the Chodesh Nisan soll in sich haben dem Zman Aviv. That during the duration of the month of Nisan, there should be some spring in there. And that would make it Pesach in the general vicinity of, in the month in the springtime. The Mele is B'negei Dem Din, as far as this halacha of being in the season, genug, for that it's sufficient as the Tkufas HaAviv, that the season of the spring will sein b'chodesh Nisan, as long as it's in the month of Nisan, afilu ben ziz b'seif hachodesh, even if spring will be in the end of the month of Nisan, but still that would mean that Pesach is within the season of the spring, because it's in the same time, because the month of Nisan is in the spring. According to this, it turns out, as also according to the calculation that Shmuel's season, that the spring, according to Shmuel, that the year is 365 and 6 hours, as a yeder machzer bleibt immer kleine sheres, and in every cycle of 19 years we have a little bit left over, is durch an Ausstellung von Shneus HaMachzer. But when we set up these 19 years so that we have only a little bit left, that's the way Hillel Hanossi set it up. So we had sort of protected them. Din for Shomer es Chodesh Aviv, we're keeping the month of Aviv b'negei to Shana Kopanim. As far within the year, we have that protected. So that's why when he made Hillel started out the 19 years, it protected according to Tkufas Shmuel, even though there's a little bit left over, but it's still going to be in the month of Nisan, so we have it as far as the Shana, we have it protected. Because even according to this cheshbon of Shmuel, it will never stretch out beyond the month of Nisan. The mit is euch verstandig, but this we also understand was the Rambam sagt dem Tam Farvos. The Rambam says the reason why Samachna Minyan Azeh. Why do we rely on this cycle of the 90 years the Machzer, the Minyan for Shlois Machzer is Machzer, but Loit Dam Cheshbon, because according to this Cheshbon, Lo Yishor Minyan Mesach Chamochut Mishachas Chulu. What's going to stay left over will only be 1 hour. So Machnu Al Minyan Zeh. So why do we rely on this calculation? Why did we rely on this? Because at least we'll get that way that the spring, Nisan will be in the spring. Because through this calculation, as the Shonim darf sein Shnei Chama. That way we know the years need to be Chama years. And in them is the Cheshbon. Also we have the Cheshbon. For that the year should remain a sun year, which means that the Pesach should always be in the Tkufas Aviv, in the time when the month of Nisan is Aviv. That's what we can rely on this calculation. But the Rebbe, this is very difficult to understand. So all we're saying here basically is that according to Shmuel, Nisan is going to be in the spring. But we know that the Rambam requires that part, should be in the general. For that we can rely also on Shmuel, it'll work out. However, what we don't understand is, at the end of the day, the Rambam holds that Pesach needs to be in the season of Tkufas Nisan, has to be in the Aviv as well. And that doesn't work according to Shmuel. As we said before, many times, if we count the year 365 minus 6 hours, then it's going to be many times Pesach is going to be before the spring, according to the Rabbi Hillel Anosi's cheshbon. So the Rambam, anyways, has to say that it goes like Abada Barava in order to make Pesach that Pesach should always be, and he says that's why we have to go according to Abada Barava. So why does it even have to try to reconcile with regards to the year according to Shmuel? Just bring down Abada Barava. The Rebbe will bring out that halachically the opinion of Shmuel is very accepted. It's la halacha, and we have many halachas that we'll see inside. We need to understand. About as to lead them din from Shomer is Chodesh Aviv. When they get Pesach, since the halacha of Shomer is Chodesh Aviv, as far as it relates to Pesach, Muzmen fort onkommen zum Emerson Cheshbon, you still have to come on to the true Cheshbon for the Kufas Rabade. You must say that the Kufas is Rabade, because otherwise Pesach is not going to be in the Chodesh Aviv. Was Davke Dan is leitim tzoteisus magzor klal Davke, then you find no extra in this cycle at all. In 19 years, you don't find any extra at all. And that is when Pesach will never be before the Tkufas Nisan, before the spring. So why does the Rambam have to say as the meaning for Shana? Just to keep it in the year. It's also fitting, it also comes out according to the calculation the way Shmuel counted. But that is not the truth. Because in the end of the day, Shmuel's will only tell you that in the year it's the approximation. It fits that the month of Nisan will be in the Aviv, but it doesn't fit that Pesach to be in the Aviv. And the Rebbe explains that no, that Kufas Shmuel is true. And we have to use this. And therefore, the Rambam wants it to fit also according to Shmuel, at least in the general ways. The Kudus Sabir in them. The point of explanation is, them Gufa was the Rambam bringt euch Kufa Shmuel in Hilchus Kiddush HaChodesh. The fact itself that the Rambam brings down the Shmuel's season, Shmuel's Kufa in the laws of Kiddush HaChodesh is muchach. It's evident as euch dit Kufa that also this season is nit nor adeya in Teres Emes. It's not just another opinion in the true Torah, nor euch aziz, euch gehalten im Psak Halacha, but also that it is consistent. It is in the ruling of the halacha. Was halacha is an inyan from emes lamita. Halacha is the truth. It's not just an opinion. With the Rambam is maramis with Meloshin, and the Rambam hints it also in his language. He says, "This is a more truer than the first one," which basically says if it's a more truer. Also, the first cheshbon of Shmuel is true. Aber cheshbon zeh, this calculation, what Abba's season, that it's in which there is emes yoser, it's more true, but they're also true. And the Rebbe says it's obvious. We find many halachas that we go by Shmuel. If the halacha was like Rabbi, so how could we go by Shmuel other halachas? I have them evidence for this, proof for this. As euch with the cheshbon of Tkufa Shmuel is angenommen the psak halacha, that also the calculation of Shmuel season is accepted for halacha. In kama halachas is that verbunden mit kufas achama, and several halachas which are connected to the season of the seasons of the sun. In some halachas rechnet men sich nor mit kufas Shmuel. We only consider kufas Shmuel. So we'll do a halacha based on the way Shmuel calculates. Say azevi birchas achama, the special bracha that we make on the moon. When the moon comes back on the time of the day, after 28 years that the moon cycles, after 28 years, it comes back in the time of the 24 hours to the same spot where it started off. That only happens once in 28 years. The bracha was memachdem is zed chama in tog for the kufas nisan. So it comes the spring, the tkufa, when this nisan started. I'm only from yet the machzer godel. That's in the beginning. Every larger cycle, which is 28 years, 28 years. So there, when the tkufa is betchilas leil revi, the moon was put on in the beginning of leil revi, the night of leil revi, and that is when it started, this season of spring, when it was put up, and that's exactly when we make the birchas hachama. Whose season? Who says that the tkufa, the spring starts then? That goes. But that is the tkufa like the cheshbon for Shmuel. That's according to the Shmuel. Or not like the cheshbon for tkufa Rabada, but that does not go according to Rabada's cheshbon. Or the zelba. So here you see clearly that the birchas hachama that we do would only go according to Shmuel. Halacha means that Shmuel is la halacha. When the zelba is benegate shalas gishon, the same thing is also about when we start saying the same Talamoto Livracha, we go by this season. Whose season do we go? That we say the Tkufas, over there we have the Tkufas Tishrei, the winter season. When does it start, the Tkufas Tevis? When does the Tkufas Tevis, when does the winter start? It starts by and we start Talamoto, we go by the Tkufa of Shmuel. Same thing is with Zehiris in Shtiyas, Mayim B'Shasat Kufa. It says not allowed to drink water. The Alter Rebbe brings it down with regard to Pesach, but Mayim Shalonu. It all goes by the Kufa of Shmuel. But in the halachas rechet men sich nor mit Kufa Shmuel. You only consider it the Kufa of Shmuel. So we see that Shmuel is reliable in halacha. So And that's why the Rambam figures it out also according to Shmuel. That's why the Rambam brings it down. Because Allah is also like Shmuel, so he has to bring down at least partially what's from Shmuel. But how does this work? There's only one fact. Kufa could be either like Shmuel or like Rabbi Barave. So how could we pass it and say that they're both true halacha? Hey, but das verstehen behagdim noch ein Inyan, was is lechayre nit moving in Kiddush HaChodesh. We can understand this by introducing another concept which is seemingly not understood in Kiddush HaChodesh. The halacha is that based in Kiddush HaChodesh, based in says the Kodesh is Mekudesh, ben sheging and ben mutim, ben anusim, whether they were made a mistake, by accident, a mistake, ben anusim, whether they were forced, like that's why they give some mazidin, they were intentional. The bottom line is, whenever Bezdin is Mekadosh the Chodesh, how does it Mekudesh? It's Mekudesh. It goes by Bezdin, even if it's the wrong day. And people are obligated to set up the Yom Tov. If that's when they made Seder Chodesh, Pesach is going to be on the 15th day of the month, whenever Bezdin was Mekadosh. So the that Teuchen the Inyan for Rosh Chodesh, Melosh and Chodesh. So, what is Rosh Chodesh means the beginning of the month. The beginning of the month is a physical thing when the moon is visible. How could you say you made a mistake? Basically, made a mistake or intentional. We're going to make Rosh Chodesh another day. How could you make another day Rosh Chodesh? It's not Rosh Chodesh. It goes against the reality. So, the Teuchen the Inyan for Rosh Chodesh, Melosh and Chidush. It's a renewal. Chodesh is verbunden mit Chidush Mel Levana. It's related, it's tied to the renewal, the birth of the Levana. To be Shaykh as the Tog in Belchan sees nit given their mother. How could you say, how does it imply that the day that is not really the birth of the moon? So better is Chodesh Misadem, it becomes Chodesh because it was Bezdin Timekatish, Bezdin sanctified. The Rambam is mazir in town for the Psak Halacha. What does the Rambam explain? The Halacha. As Chayav Makoil is Sakin Amoid Hayim Shekichuboy. Why are everybody obligated to set up their yomtis for the day that they sanctified? Well, Misha Tziva Lishmer Samoid is who Tziva Lishmachavay. Was the one who told us to keep the yomtiv. Hashem told us. He told us to rely on them. So he says you don't have to. Figure out why, because Hashem is the one that says, follow the Yom Tov and follow the Yom Tov, make the Yom Tov when they said. This is seemingly only a sufficient reason why we are obligated to rely on the sanctity of the month by Bezdin. So like it moving the Retzim, but we still don't understand the idea itself. Okay, we got to do Yom Tov because that's what Bezdin said. But how does it become Rosh Chodesh? If the Moil is in another talk, if the Moil is in another day. So how does the day become Rosh Chodesh? Both. So the Rebbe is going to explain that just because the physical, the Vone is on another day, doesn't mean that the spiritual aspect of the new month didn't happen. And therefore we can go by that. Possibly we can explain. The sun, the moon, and their idea dolamato here below, azevi alvasi dolamato, just like everything below. They are evolved from the level of the sun and the moon and their matters the way above. Therefore, those of us that talk from the fact that the day that the Vona is visible has been decided as Rosh Chodesh. Mainly it comes because of the birth of the Vona above. It's not the physical brings the spiritual. If I care, because the spiritual, it's the time of the Vona, that's why we have the physical. We have the birth of one. And since how do we know, how we understand what goes on above, is through the aspects, through how they come down below. The far is the Torah ungesagt. That's why the Torah instructed us. As that we need to set up Rosh Chodesh according to the birth of the one below, because that means that above is the Me'il Levana. Whether it was during the time that they saw it by visually seeing the moon, or according to the calculation. But from them, as Demot is the Me'il Levana. That's why we know that is when the birth of the one is above. In another tone, in a case when Bezdin had, however, set up Rosh Chodesh on another day, when the Torah tells us to rely on them, that is evidence as Dafki in them tog, that is specifically in that day, that Torah, the true Torah sets up as Chodesh, is the Moiled Halavona the main Moiled Halavona is above, is in that day. And those was the matter is demol der Moiled in another time. Why below is the Moiled another day? Because the far was the Elam Hazah Tachten. The reason is because this lower world is to see the shyness for various reasons. Demol nitroi, it's not fitting them as the Amshocha from Bechinas Levana Shal Mailo, that the one of above should extend the Rabkumen in the Levana Shal Mato in them Zman. Should come that time. So there's some reason that it doesn't come down, but that is when the real Moiled is. Similar is also with regard to the above mentioned halachas. Those halacha which are connected with the season of the Chama and the blessed Chama. The dinim for Torah's emes beikrum verbunden mit kufas Chama shalmayim. The laws of the true Torah are mainly tied to the true Tkufas Chama that's above. The Ribberis Kinkashini, that's why it's not a problem, was by the dinim wird angenommen der Cheshbon von Tkufas Shmuel, that by these halachas the calculation of Shmuel is accepted. Choch as the Cheshbon Amiti from the Tkufa Lamata, even though the true calculation of the Tkufa below is like Tkufas Rabada, is according to the season of Rabada. Or Vibauteres Emezok, since Torah, which is true, says, as noch jede 28 Jahre is the halacha kach v'kach. After 28 the halacha is such and such, like Shmuel, was he's verbunden mit der Tkufa, it's with that Tkufa. Is that from Gufa Muchel? From it we have evidence, as in Demsman is the Tkufa Shemaila, that that's the time the Tkufa is above. So his nerve was to gewisse Sibas, it's only for various reasons, kommt Harab the Tkufa the Lamata, that this season comes down below in another Zman, and another time Tkufa Rabada. So therefore, it's not a problem that the Tkufa is different physically, which is Rabada's truer, and still the halacha, the spiritual Tkufa, is above. The Rebbe is going to ask, but it's still problematic, as we will continue to see. After all the above, we still need to understand this. How could we say about Kufas Hachamo, about Birchas Hachamo, in where the seeing of the physical moon is the determination? How could we say because above it's Kufas Hachamo at that time? All aspects that are written in Torah, especially those that come down in halacha in actuality, practical, is ein mikra da psakdin yitzim de pshuta. So the pasuk and the ruling does not leave its simple meaning. One must observe the halachas literally. Although every aspect in the world, especially in Torah, has a root above and a spiritual. So things are literal. Torah is literal. And we're not only talking, not only we're saying that mitzvahs have to be done literally. As specifically when you observe them literally, You can take you can also take the spiritual aspects of the mitzvahs. As a mitzvahs tefillin, say for example, mitzvahs tefillin was darke durch ki mitzvahs tefillin specifically when we fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin literally is memamshin the meaning for dal meichen v'chulu. Then we draw down the level of the four meichen. So you got to do the tefillin. You can't just bring the dal meichen the spiritual. So not only with regards to mitzvahs, was werden gebracht und angesagt in all matters, all aspects that have been brought down and instructed in the Torah is canal as before it's in the Pshuta. The pasuk means literally. So based on this, it's difficult to understand that so what does it mean when you see the sun in the tkufa when it's time on the 28-year cycle? So we're talking about the time that the Chama came there physically. It's the bracha you make for Birchas Chama. You say the one who does the act of creation, they did Tkufa Shalom on a Tkufa which is above, which is not connected, because Rabba's Tkufa is not then. This is Shmuel's Tkufa. If the Tkufa Shalom B'shas Adol Matter is in dem Zman, we talk in Tkufa Begashmis, there is no physical Tkufa. Now, let it be before by Rosh Chodesh. We said before, Bezdin makes a mistake. But over there, it's mostly the halachas that are involved. But here we're talking about physical seeing. You only make a bracha when you see. Ches, v'af pi. By Kiddush HaChodesh that even by Kiddush HaChodesh there is a, we're forced to say, as it's zone. We have to say so. Kenal Siva. We said that what? As the Kiddush, v'kvis, v'Rosh Chodesh, that when we sanctify, we said Rosh Chodesh in it hanging in Zman from El Levana Shlomata. It does not hinge on what the real time when the Levana is visible below. And you, in Bezdin makes a mistake, it's to follow Bezdin. That's Kodesh. Is Aberdo Achilik zwischen the meaning for Rosh Chodesh and B'kus L'chama. There is a difference between Rosh Chodesh that we can follow the spiritual versus Kufas L'chama. Over there, it's not so easy to say to follow the spiritual Kufas L'chama. Although Rosh Chodesh is tied to the birth of the Levana, to the reappearance of the Levana, he says, but in essence, from Welt, not a in essence, it's not something from the world, and it's a Torah existence. In other words, what is Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh is nothing. Rosh Chodesh is, the Torah says Rosh Chodesh is something. So when the Torah says Rosh Chodesh is something, it could be the spiritual Rosh Chodesh. Those what says is at Torah those what says is Ayim Kodesh, Rosh Chodesh. When do you do it? Was based on Makadosh given. Or Kitshua Shemayim, either based on or Kitshua from the fact that it's the calendar, or whenever the date is already automatically. The riber is like to sustain. So there it's easier to grasp, to understand. With the mitzvahs from Rosh Chodesh is verbunden mit Melech Shel Maila. That Rosh Chodesh existence is connected with Melech Shel Maila because essentially it's a Torah issue over here. When the Melech Shel Maila is another mind, we can understand it can be Rosh Chodesh even if the physical Moiled is in a different time. But when we're talking about seeing the sun in the time that it was put up, how does this exist in that law? It's not like Rosh Chodesh where the halacha comes from the Torah. That comes from not from the Dinah Torah was verbunden. It's not the laws of the Torah that are associated with Chamet Kufos, not from the Mahalach HaChamet. This comes from the cycle of the sun. Those was Zun gefindt sich in demselben Zman, that the sun finds itself at the same time, if in selben Ort in the same spot, this is given, this is Bashafen geworden, at the time that it was created, on that same day, on Wednesday, when the sun was put up. Is doch nicht move on, so it's not understood. About as in din Torah Gufa is negated the mitzvahs visit the Olamato, since the law of Torah itself over there it is important. It connects to the mitzvahs, to the existence that is below. How could you make a blessing for the sun as the sun is bitkufas above? Kashi is not started. The question is greater. The din from Birchas Chama is when we Zuraya Chama. You have to see when do you make the halachas, when do you make the lesson Chama is only when you see the Kufasa. The Chama Bagashmas, you can't see it physically. It's cloudy. Let's say Tormek Bracha Lit Machen. You're not allowed to make a bracha. So which means the bracha is verbunden mit Zen the Gashmis the Kizum. So the blessing is connected to same with the physical sun. Chodzi is not vi bit Kufasa, and even though it's not really in the season. Man macht the bracha, and you make the bracha to the dam the Chama Ruchnis is bit Kufasa. Is because it is not in the season. So because according to Rabbi, that's not the season, and the halacha is like Rabbi in the fact, and Shmuel, the season is not the season. We're doing it by according to Shmuel. Test. So the Rebbe says, after first we can say, and introducing was the Cheshbon at Kufis. That when do they start? From when do we start whether it's 365 and 6 days, which is silent Kufis Shmuel, and 6 hours, 365, 6 hours, silent Kufis Rabadas, 365 minus 6 hours. When do we start counting those 365 days? So it's hetzich nit on for the erste Tkufa from Israel. You don't start from the first Tkufa, the first season that was after creation, nor from the Tkufa in Shnas Toyu. We start in the Tkufa that was in the year of chaos before creation. Before the world was created. And that's what then is. What is the explanation? So in other words, we have an imaginary date from before when the world was created. And that's what then is. Like in the Plukta, about the disagreements between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. See, the world was created in Tisha or in Nisan, is Mavur become a Mekoimis. So in several places explained. Yes, some have the version so in Tosus. As Beta Day is Nemes, both of these opinions are true. The Nisan is all of Machshav and Libra Soilom. In Nisan, it entered Hashem's thought to create the world. On the Bria, the Poil is going to the actual creation was in Tisha. On the Baal, does let Kufas Kaimalon with Rabbi Yeshua, since for Kufas we always go like Rabbi Yeshua, who says that the world was created. The Nisan was the Riberecht met Kufas Nisan, the Shnas Toyu Shlivnei Tishrei. That's what we count the season of Nisan, the way it was the year before creation, Shnas Toyu, before Tishrei. When all of Machshav Livre, when it went up in Hashem's mind to create. The Riber, therefore, is when it gets a Birchas Achamo, Rechet man sich mit der Tkufa shel Mailo. That's why when we do the Birchas Achamo, we are calculating the Tkuf of above. Afapias the Tkuf is an Andersman, even though the Tkuf is at a different time, but we're going by the Tkufa, we start with the Toyu. Well, that is his movement again, the andere dinim, also the similar understood the other halachas, the Chazainen verbunden with the Tkufa that are associated with Kufa, was is not only Tkufa Shmuel, which would only go according to Tkufa Shmuel, that because we're dealing with years of Toyu. The Tkufa Shalamayla, the Tkufa above, it baldas that on him when you saw it from ganzen Cheshbon and Tkufa since the beginning, and the basis for the entire calculation of all the seasons is an Inyan for Tkufa Toyu, is a season of Toyu, from all of the Machshav from the entrance store to create. When the river is done in the Geya, that's why over here it's not important. As the Tkufa Shebemaisa, that also the Tkufa in action, so Zayin themselves man should be in the same time. Aber von deswegen is moving, yet it's understood as the Tkufa Shalamaylo poiled oich beruchnos b'pnimis, that the Tkufa above impacts spiritually and in inner if the Chama Lamata on the sun below. Was the Fad is Birchas Achama verbunden mit Rias Achama Hagashmis, with the seeing of the physical sun. So it's connected, but really the basis is the Torah. So so Yud, we have to understand on the other side. The Baal does the Inyan at Kufa Shel Mailo is Davke Leider Cherib with Kufa Shpoel, since the Tkuf of above is only according to the Cheshbon Tkuf of Shmuel, or not from Tkuf of Rabada, not the Tkuf of Rabada. But Zayin Cheshbon is not B'Shaychet to the Tkuf of Shalamata. His calculation is only as the Tkuf is below the physical Tkuf. Is wie Shayach Suzon, so how could we say is that Tziv and Torah? That the Torah's command as Pesach Muzayin Dafkin is Man Ha'ovim. That Pesach needs to be specifically in the spring. Was das king gemol sein nur lit kufas rabada. This can only be called rabada. Und nicht lit kufas shmuel can also be dalet. Because with kufas shmuel, there's many years that Pesach will not going to be in the spring. It's verbunden nur mit der kufa shalmata. This is only associated with the kufa below, which is the kufa of rabada. Because you see that according to Shmuel, Pesach is not b'chodesh Av. It's the Birda explanation in this. The Tama Dover was the Tkufa Shalamato. What is the reason that the season below is an another man for the Tkufa Shalamato, different of the Tkufa above? Is Val Olam is Kenal, as because the world, as mentioned before, Damos Nitroi, so often the Tkufa Shalamato. The world is not fitting to accept the season of above, the way it's above. Which is Hecher from Velton, you say that as manner which is in a higher than the world and the order of times. But Medvar Mamurim, when is this said? But this is from Velt. When we talk about a Metzias, a worldly Metzias, or the Inyan from Pesach, Sheyiyah Pesach was man Oviv, that Pesach needs to be in the time of Oviv. The Baldas Pesach is a Torah Dik Metzias, since Torah Pesach is a existent Torah. So the season above comes down the same time as it's above. This haste, as those was Pesach is Bisman Ha'aviv Alamo. We say that Bisman is as Oichloi der Tkufa Shalamayla. That it's also the Tkufa above. It's also that Masha Enkim B'Negeya. So, in other words, the Pesach is in Aviv, whether the Aviv Shalamato according to Rabbi or Aviv Shalamaylo according to Shmuel. That's going to be either way. And again, from the worldly perspective, is the Hamshocha Bechinas Kufa Shalamaylo in another Zman. So the Kufa Shalamaylo comes in a different time. The Cheshbon with Kufa Shmuel comes down in a different time. So, but the spiritual tkufa is always, so Pesach is always going to be in the spring, either the physical according to Rabada, or according to Shmuel in the spiritual. Was the Rambam zogt, that this, we rely on this number, and we're saying, at least in the year, as the Shona Dav Zayin as a Yor was his Chodesh is Bisman Oviv. But it has to be a year that the month of Nisan should be during the spring. This is also consistent with the calculation of Shmuel. Af al pi has been negated some din from Pesach, even though with regards to Pesach Dav Zayin Bisman Oviv. So that you need that Pesach, we need to come on to the Kufas Rabada, because physically it's only going to be according to Rabada. Hayus has been Geya in Yoni Ha'ilom is Nam Shochas at Kufa Shalamayla, like the Cheshbon for the Kufa Shmuel Canal. Since as it relates to the matters of the world, the Kufa of above comes down according to the Cheshbon for Shmuel. The river is the din b'negei shona, but sametzias for noilam has to be as a dav zayin oizgehalten oichlet kuva Shmuel, that it should be also according to kuva Shmuel, which means we need it to be a little bit according to Shmuel too. We can't just have it in the spiritual sense. The Rambam has to say that it works at least partially according to Shmuel, because it works fully according to Shmuel as far as the spiritual one, but as far as in Yonah Elam, the cheshbon Tkufas Shmuel, at least it meets in the Shana, that the Shana is in the same time, and it has to be direct Tkufas Shmuel. This is Mesichas Achar Shal Pesach Tavshin Yud Gimel.